Hi guys, I'm Anita and I'm back with another video. Today I want to share with you a tag video. I was recently tagged by my friend Kirsten to do the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader book tag, which is a tag that was originally created by the book pusher on BookTube. My friend Kirsten has a Danish blog, fantasy blog. She reads a lot of fantasy, so if you know the Danish language, I'll leave a link to her blog down below, and you can check it out. Otherwise, yeah, I'll definitely leave a link to the original tag down below as well. So there's a bunch of questions, so let's get into them. The first question is, what is your fantasy origin story? So basically, how did you come about the fantasy genre, and what was the first books you read from the fantasy genre? Now, I've always known I loved fantasy, but I haven't always been a reader. I only started reading when I was 20. So I was quite old when I started my reading journey. I'm not sure about this specific age, but I know I read this in 2007. So that's basically me trying to calculate in my head. But the first book I ever read and picked up for pleasure reading was in fact Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. So this was my first experience with fantasy, which is also one of the reasons why it's a series that I consider a favorite, because it was so important to me in terms of my reading. It is not perfect. I don't think it's perfect at all. I'm currently reading the second book in the series, and I'm enjoying it. I enjoy the atmosphere and the feeling I get when I read them, but I still don't think they're perfect. But the reason I picked this up, I mean, I'd watched the 5 movies before this. So I was just, the reason why I picked it up was because my sister was reading this book. She'd been reading, I think, the majority of the books sort of slowly, but I'd never really been interested until I was actually really into the films, and she was reading this and she was laughing all the time when she was reading it, and she was just so absorbed in it, and I didn't really get it because she wasn't a reader like I am now. She was just reading this, but because her and my dad read this, and I think my brother as well, and they got to know the story and could talk about it, I felt like I was out of the loop. So I picked this one up finally, and it took me, I think, a couple of weeks or 3 to read it. To me, it was a big book to get through because it was the first one I ever picked up for my own pleasure that I wanted to read. But I enjoyed it so much when I was reading it, and I think it was a fun journey, and it was not difficult for me to follow along with the story because I knew them from all of the characters from the films. There were a couple of characters that I hadn't met before, but I think that it wasn't a problem understanding what was going on in this one. So yeah, this was my first ever experience with a fantasy book, and I haven't looked back since. So that was the first question. The second question is, if you could be the hero or heroine from a fantasy novel, who would the author be? What's one trope you'd insist to be in the story? This is a difficult question because a lot of the fantasy books that I read, the worlds they're in are not very, are a little bit scary, and I don't think I would enjoy being in them. I don't want to bring any of it out to be a part of my life. But if I had any author writing my character, I'd want it to be Robin Hobb, only because she is a master at creating characters and giving them attention. The amount of dedication she puts to her characters makes me want her to rewrite me, I guess. And the other part of the question, that what was the trope you'd insert into it, I don't know. In the Elderling world, I don't want to be in Buckkeep, which is where Fitz is. I would probably rather be in Bingtown, which is the live ship traders area, because I like the vibes that that area of the world gives. So I think I would be somewhere around there. Maybe I'd be on a ship. I don't think I would be good at sailing though, but now I'm too afraid to train dragons and serpents. I don't know what I would be doing, but I would want to be in that area. I think that's the least scary I could find. I mean, I could have picked a Discworld, and I wouldn't be as terrible. I think that's like some parts of the Tolkien universe is also good, but I just wanted Robin Hobb to be writing my character. The third question is, what is the fantasy that you read this year that you want more people to read? This is actually a difficult question, because I haven't read any all-time favorites recently at all, except Howl's Moving Castle, which I read last week. I gave it 5 stars. It was so well written, but I think a lot of people have already read it, so it's like not a new book, but I guess that's it so far. I'm also in the middle of Gods of Jade and Shadow, the book by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I really love that one. I'm currently reading it, so I can't say right now if it's a 5 stars, but I definitely think that other people should read it, and I'm currently reading a book that I'm also really enjoying, so I'm definitely reading a couple of good books. But finished books that I've read this year, I only think I have Howl's Moving Castle, because the other books that I rated 5 stars hasn't been straight up fantasy. They have been more like science fiction books, or a classic, or well, straight up 5 stars actually on magical realism and stuff. But yeah, so this was actually a bit difficult to answer. The fourth question is, what is your favorite subgenre in fantasy? And which subgenre have you not read very much from? I mean, urban fantasy is for sure a subgenre in the fantasy genre, but I never really consider them in the same boat. I always keep a separate tracking of urban fantasies and straight up fantasy, because I feel like there are different things I look for when I read it, but if I consider urban fantasy to be part of it, that would be my favorite genre. But it's mostly because I just find it so easy to get into an urban fantasy story, because you don't have to have that much of a world building. I love the world building when I read a fantasy, but when I seek something that is easy for me to get into and just breeze through, but I still want the fantasy feeling, I go for urban fantasy. And I think it's one of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much. It's just so easy to pick up. And I've also found a couple of authors who I really, really love in that genre. But if I divide them, there's definitely no doubt that high fantasy is my favorite, I guess. But high fantasy is such a big subgenre, like it's mostly all fantasy falls in that boat. It's difficult because I feel like my favorite fantasy series are quite different, so I can't even say that it's the same genre or subgenre. But I really enjoy following either apprentice storylines, something to do with alchemy magic, and alchemy is just one of my favorite type of magic systems, so if that is used, I love it. Usually tend to enjoy it a lot. So I guess those two things, and genres that I haven't read a lot. Weird fiction, weird fantasy, like the new weird genre. I don't read a lot of that, but it is what I'm interested in. And then there's also fairy tales. Even though it's a really, really popular genre, I don't tend to enjoy them as much as other people seems to do. So I guess those two are my least read genres for sure. And the question number 5 is, who is your autobi fantasy author? And before I get into the next part of my discussion, I would like to say that I don't actually think I have an author that I own all of the books. I don't. But I do have 4, like I keep a spreadsheet of that's called my favorite authors bibliography, which contains currently 4 authors who I would like to own all the books in some way or form in the future. And I'm currently working my way through them, so I've kept track on that because my aim is to read all of them. My battery's flashing, that's not good. But on that list I have 4 authors, and I don't think they're super surprising to anyone, but they are Terry Pratchett, obviously. Currently I'm working through the Discworld, so it's a way for me also to know which books I already own and which books I have to get from the Discworld books, but also all of the companion books, as well as the other series that he's read and all of the standalones, because I want to read all of them. I have Robin Hobb. I also want to read all of the Robin Hobb. I only have, in the Robin Hobb name, I only have the trilogy that she did, the Soul de Jean trilogy, and the 2 collections. But she also had, I think, between 10 to 15 books under her name, Megan Lindholm, which is her real name. Robin Hobb is a pseudonym, so I also want to read those, even though they were written before them, but I want to see how she got there in the first place. And then I have Jim Butcher on there. I've read all of the Dresden Files that's published so far, so I'm really looking forward to the new one that comes out in July. But I also want to read the Codex Alera series and the Cinder Spire series, which is his 2 other series, but I haven't read any of them, but I want to read all of them. And then I have Patricia Briggs as well, who I want to read all of them, and I've currently only read all of the Mercy Thompson books, except the most newly released books, which is on the way here, so I'll read it soon. But those are the 4 authors I want to put into this question, because it's certainly an author I want to own all of the things, but I don't have any authors that I just buy immediately when it comes out. Hi guys, I was cut off. I need to get a second battery because I had to wait a little bit while this was charging, so I can switch while if it runs out while I'm filming. So the question was, how do you typically find fantasy recommendation, which was the 6th question. You do use Goodreads, YouTube, podcast, Instagram. I definitely in the beginning only used like Goodreads, because that was how I even discovered all other books. Back in 2011, when I discovered BookTube, it was a really helpful tool for me in order to find books that were similar to the ones that I'd already been reading. Then there was the time when it was only like BookTube. Almost, or well, like I also still got recommendations from Goodreads, but the majority came from BookTube, which has been since 2016 until now ish. Except my currently how I get to know about new releases is by Tor.com website. They do every month, they do a post on all science fiction, all fantasy, and all genre benders that comes out. And sometimes also all of the young adult and children's fantasy that comes out in a given month. And it's not only Tor releases, it's everything. It's also all of the self-published stuff, almost. And they collect all of it. And I think that's a really good way of discovering if there's something new coming out that you're interested in, because it has all of the genres. And it's definitely been really, really helpful for me. In terms of finding out what new is coming out and what I think I would be enjoying, because it can be easy to be swayed with the popular fantasy, because that is what is mostly talked about on BookTube and on Goodreads. But with Tor.com, they actually also make room for all of the self-published stuff, and so that way you can find stuff that you wouldn't have heard of otherwise, maybe. But I think it's a nice way of finding out what's coming out over the year. So I definitely recommend them, and I will leave a link to one of their recent posts in the comments down below with fantasy recommendations. Question number 7 is, what is an upcoming release, fantasy release that you're excited about? I have actually quite a few. Like a couple of them have already been published, so they're on the way here. I'm looking forward to reading them. So books that are not published yet that I'm excited about. There's the next book in the Fountain's series called Shorefall, and the Dresden File books, the new Dresden File books is called Peace Talk. I'm excited, insanely excited about that. And then Hollow Pucks by Jessica Townsend. I think those 3 books are my most anticipated fantasy releases of the year. I don't know if I have any other currently that I'm that excited about that I just must have. Because like Mercy Thompson was just released in April, I think, and City We Became has also come out and is on the way here. So like those 2 were some of my other most anticipated releases, and other releases that I'm interested in are like science fiction books, so, or other genres. Those 3 books are my most anticipated for the upcoming future. Question number 8 is, what is one misconception about fantasy that you would like to lay to rest? I'm probably going to be mentioning more or less the same thing as Kirsten, because I think we both have the same feeling about fantasy. Like we both genuinely love the genre, and don't consider it a genre that is only for kids. Like that whole the whole thing that people look at the fantasy genre as being something that kids enjoy, and that's something, especially in Denmark, that's like, in Denmark it's only okay if you read like literary fiction type stuff, or crime fiction, like that is the thing, or like biographies, something like that. But the fantasy is always looked down upon a lot, and people who are adults who say, oh, I'm reading fantasy, they would look at them, are you really? It's like, isn't that like a kid's genre? Aren't you too old for that? And no. I don't think a lot of the books that I'm reading, I would ever consider. Some of the books I read shouldn't be read when you're too young, for sure. So it's just weird, but I would say it has become better since people have become so excited about Game of Thrones, the TV show, but it's more in the TV form than it is in the book form. It still don't get as much mention in the book form, so yeah, that's a little bit sad and that's a little bit annoying, but that is something I would like to change, that people wouldn't look at fantasy as a negative, like a genre that is below something else. I think everyone should be entitled to read whatever they feel like it makes it fun for them to read, because reading should be fun. It shouldn't be something that you feel like you have to read. So yeah, I think that would be my thing. Question number 9 is, if someone ever read a fantasy, had never read a fantasy before, and asked you to pick something for them, what would you choose? And I think that's a really difficult question to answer, because it all depends on where you come from reading wise before. If you're young, maybe you've even read some, maybe you've read some young adult fantasy and want to try adult fantasy, or maybe it's the first time you ever read something fantasy like, or maybe you are used to reading, used to reading fast-paced stuff, if you're used to be sort of mysteries or something, or if you're used to read literary fiction. I have different things I would think would be suitable. So if you are from literary fiction, I'll definitely recommend something like Robin Hobb, because Robin Hobb's writing style is very descriptive, it is show moving plot, and it's very character driven, and not so much plot driven. So I think that would be a good gateway into the fantasy genre from that perspective. If you come from if you're a young person want to get into fantasy, I would suggest something like Terry Pratchett, something like The Hobbit. It's a good, like, it could be a good place to start. It's fairly easy to get into, or like some young adult fantasy for sure, like, or Tamora Pierce or Rick Riordan. Like, I think they are good places to start if you want to. If you want fast-paced stuff, or if you're like used to reading mysteries and stuff, I think a lot of urban fantasy has some detective sort of stuff. especially like the Dresden Files would maybe work for that. Obviously also like Harry Potter is a good starting place for a lot of people, because I think it's easy to get into. It's still set in our world, like with relatable characters, and you get to learn it slowly alongside Harry. So I think that is a good entrance to fantasy as well. And question number 10 is, who is the most recent fantasy reading content creator you came across that you'd like to shout out? Ooh, I forgot her name. Her channel name is Beggle Panda. I think it seems like she reads a lot of adult fantasy stuff, and I have recently subscribed to her. I think she has about a little over 1,000 subscribers, I think. So definitely I'll leave a link to that down below. Yeah, that was the last question, so now it's time for tagging. So I'll tag Shannon from Shannon Riddler, because she's just recently started doing YouTube videos again, and she, while not only reading fantasy, definitely reads some fantasy, so I think she could do it. I'll tag Rhea from the Bookfinch if she hasn't done it. I don't think I've seen this tag before, but if you have done it, I'm sorry. And I will tag Crack Into a Good Book. So those 3 will be tagged for this. And yeah, that is all. Definitely let me know in the comments down below how you got into fantasy. If you have any good recommendations, definitely let me know about that as well. And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video very, very soon. Goodbye!